This episode is brought to you by Mentors. When you need a tutor or a master, cicerone or godfather, handler, drill sergeant, life coach, director, chaperone, inculcate smarty pants, or bossy boots, check out Mentors. Mentors is where you go when you don't know where to go, or where to get off, or let's face it, how to find your own ass with both hands with a map and a flashlight. Mentors is that wise old sage at the top of the mountain that happens to be available on the other side of a FaceTime. And use the promo code REREAD, one word, to try out their newest product, Svengali. You can subscribe at the Rasputin level, or if you're feeling spunky, step up directly to Mein Führer. And thank you, Mentors, for sponsoring the Rereading Wolf podcast. This episode is brought to you by the support of generous listeners just like you. You can learn how to be one of them at patreon.com/rereadingwolf. And thank you, listener patrons, for supporting the Rereading Wolf podcast.
Warning. The following discussion is deliberately riddled with spoilers and unhinged speculation on this 40-year-old book, Gene Wolfe's The Book of the New Sun. You can't read a Gene Wolfe story. You can only reread a Gene Wolfe story.
Welcome to Rereading Wolf. We've read these books many times, and we assume you have too, or at least plan to. Besides, we're here to understand them, and that means considering the works as a whole.
Hi, I'm James Wynn.
And I'm Craig Brewer. Welcome to another bonus episode. It's been a while since we've had one. This time, we're speaking with CSE Cooney and her husband, Carlos Hernandez. Wolfe was something of a mentor to Cooney and encouraged her and read drafts from her early starts throughout her career up to his death. So we thought it would be fun to speak with her and get that pretty unique perspective. But honestly, we wouldn't have her on the show if she weren't a really fascinating writer in her own right. Wolfe had to have good taste, right? And in this case, he certainly did. At least I think so. Cooney's style is definitely different from Wolfe's. But I find it fascinatingly weird in a good way, of course. She did win 2 World Fantasy Awards, after all, one for her story collection, Bone Swans, and one for her latest novel. She's got a really dramatic, sometimes even flamboyant kind of style, but it's not totally silly or overly melodramatic or anything. There's a strange sort of mythic dimension. Kind of on the one hand, like someone definitely coming from a theater kid background, but in the best way, like the really interesting way. And at the same time, just very serious. There's very serious mythic quality to a lot of what she writes. Genre-wise, it's certainly speculative fiction, but it doesn't always fall into easy fantasy sci-fi categories, which, again, thumbs up. It can also be very Baroque sometimes. The actual language, because her linguistic style is often I'm looking at the cover of her novel, The Twice Drowned Saint, which won the World Fantasy Award. And it's making me think that this sort of gem-like or sort of faceted bubble-like thing would be a good way to describe the actual language sometimes. Not bubbly, but like shiny, like a bubble. But her big debut was really a collection called Bone Swans that I highly, highly, highly recommend. She's definitely doing something that's got one foot in a little bit of an experimental area, but another that's really grounded in just intense emotion and lots of deep familiarity with genre. So you guys will like it. And that's probably abstract enough to introduce her style. Luckily, she's not abstract in person. This was a really fun conversation. Her website, in fact, calls her a writer, poet, and performer, which is certainly appropriate. Plus, we met at Gen Con, which is a big international gaming convention held every year. So we were in a place that totally encourages play. And we were there, or she was there, because she and her husband, who is also a successful writer and scholar in his own right, have released a really cool narrative game that lets you play out a situation where aliens infiltrate 16th century European court culture. I'll let them explain it more, but it's badass even just to read it. I bought a copy. I haven't had a chance to actually play it yet, but I have read through the whole thing. Point is, if you haven't read her stuff before, you should. she is the real deal. And that's not just me saying that. Her books are blurred by people like Wolfe, of course, but also Catherine Valente, Theodore Goss, James Enge. I never know how to pronounce his name. Martha Wells, other people, lots of well-established writers. So definitely pick up something of hers, give it a try. Or her husband. I don't want to give him short shrift because they definitely sort of live the genre con scene together. But since we're all Wolfe focused here, you know, that's our focus. And sorry for the sound quality in this one. We actually couldn't find a quiet room at Gen Con. Tried to get one. So we tried to go off in a corner. And we did reasonably well, but then the sessions would change. And so we'd have lots of people walking by. But I don't think it got too bad. Hope you enjoy it. Oh, and it's just me. No James this time. Gen Con was close to me this year, so it was easy drive. And I almost got sucked back into Warhammer 40K, but the price tags are more insane than ever. But I digress. So let's get to it. Claire Cooney publishes as CSE Cooney, just to be clear, which I didn't catch up on that. You guys have a really fun blog that I think is like I told you, that's where I met you first, was through the blog.
Right.
But so your work is very cool and unique, and I'll have to say that I read Bone Swans, I read Saint Death's Daughter, but my favorite thing that you read was The Twice Drowned Saint, just because it was strange.
It is so strange.
And that was what really, I mean, I will say, if anything, weird is where I go. And the stuff I like about Wolfe is when he does that weird, not just the sci-fi, not just fantasy, it's all there.
I bet you like the Big Baja and Bone Swans, too.
Yes, I do remember that one.
I can see somebody who'd like the Big Baja would also like the Twice Drowned Saint,
Yeah.
which are polarizing in almost any other situation.
Yeah, but what's fun about that book was that you set it up, and there's constantly like, oh, okay, I know the world-building rules now, but then they change as time goes on, and then sort of the angel's capriciousness and whatnot makes it very fun to me.
You should look at her uncanny short story, The Thief of Lesser Night. What is that one again?
Lily White and the Thief of Lesser Night is actually in the Ellen Datlow Mad Hatters and March Hares.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
Cool.
I got it's a very weird one, but I took the Red Queen and the White Queen because we were writing in the Alice world as little girls solving a mystery. So they're like two little girl detectives. It's very weird.
And you narrated that one too, right? Is that what you said?
I did.
yesterday?
I narrated the half of the stories that would have been appropriate to have a female narrator,
Gotcha.
and then the other half was narrated by a male narrator.
Okay, gotcha too. So I'll have to pick your brain about that too.
Sure.
But so the reason I kind of initially wanted to talk to you was I know that your name is someone that comes up when people start looking for other writers who worked with Wolfe or were influenced by him. And I can't remember the exact quote right now, but there is something out there where he was like, yes, Claire Cooney is someone who, you know, I think the world of and want to I think everybody should pay attention to her. So that's kind of what initially made me do it. So what was your relationship to Wolfe?
It was lovely, and it started out that my father called me when I was still living in Arizona, and he says, when you come visit next, and he was in the Chicago area, Barrington, where Gene and Rosemary lived. He says, there's a guy in my congregation who's a science fiction writer, and I was telling him about you and asked if he would give you some advice, and he said, sure, have her call me. And he tells me this, well, I'm still in Arizona, about to come visit for a long visit in Chicago, and I was like, my father, so helpful, and yet doesn't know me at all. I would never call a complete stranger. I've never done it in my life before, and I probably wouldn't. And it was like 17, 18. So that said, I had it in my mind that introduction might be made someday in like the next few months, but I really ignored it because it's just not something I would do.
Yeah.
But on my way to the Chicagoland area, I had this huge TBR stack of books people had lent me that they wanted me to read. And I took whatever was off the top that my friend Lydia had lent me. I took it on to read on the plane. And it happened to be Shadow of the Torturer by Gene Wolfe. Lydia is a huge Gene Wolfe fan. So I read it, and when I realized that the person in my father's congregation was Gene Wolfe, my dad is a liturgical musician, I was like, oh, I just read his book. A complete surprise to me, and it was an accident. So I was like, okay, at least I know who he's talking about. Yeah. And then, all by accident, my dad's office was very near to his house, and I was walking past the parking lot, and the lot was full, but somebody had left their lights on. So I went up to my dad's office to tell him. I didn't know if there was an announcement somebody could make or, you know. And he and this other man just turned around, and he says, Claire, we were just talking about you. Meet Gene Wolfe. And once I met him, I would, of course, have had no problem calling him because he was the most, like, welcoming, twinkly-eyed, just so twinkly-eyed, like, very just benevolent. There was this instant, like, oh, yeah, I could totally, like, make him my great-uncle. You know what I mean? Yeah. So my dad and Gene's wife, Rosemary, and my dad's wife, Terry, and I all went out to dinner. And he was so darling and comfortable that remember I was 18. By the end of dinner, I was like, can I give you my novel to read? Which I now know what that sounds like and what that is. And his beautiful face, he looked at me, and there was like just a little pause. And I was old enough to kind of read that moment a little bit better. So I started backpedaling. I was like, oh, no, never mind. You know, like, that's a big ask. And he said, I will read the first 3 chapters, but I can't promise to say anything about them. And I said, oh, that's fine. I will just give you 1 chapter. He says, no, you can give me 3. So I sent him the first 3 chapters. And he may only have read the first chapter, but he wrote me a 3-page letter about it. Oh, wow. And so even when I went back to Arizona briefly, I was there for like a year doing massage therapy school. And then I moved to Chicago to go to college after that. But in that year, we started a correspondence. But like I would write, he would write. And then he said one of his first pieces of advice was, it's time to set novels aside first. I had written 3 novels in high school. You know, set those aside. It's time to concentrate on your craft. The way to do that is short stories. Build your byline. This because he's coming from a mid-20th century way of doing things, and it was towards the end of that where you could still do that in the aughts, I should say. Right. But you would still submit mostly through paper. You would still get paper rejections. So he taught me how to write a cover letter. And basically, I had never written short form before, so I started by the easy stuff, I guess, or the stuff where it made sense to me, like retelling a fairy tale or often a weird dream I'd had, because they were the size of what I thought were short stories. I hadn't quite studied the form enough to know how to. So, and he would read them and he'd critique them, and if I got a rejection slip, he's like, great, now give it a new revision and send it off. He said, wash her face and put a new address on her and send her off. And like so, and then he encouraged me to go to Twilight Tales once I started going to college, which was a weekly reading series in Chicago. He saved a flyer for me from one of his conventions. And again, so shy, not shy in a public performance way, shy to do a new thing, always have been. And a few years later, I've had it on my fridge for like 2 years when I talked a friend to going with me. And of course, as soon as I went for the first time, instant welcome, total community. It became one of like how I knew most of the writers, a lot of the horror writers in Chicago. And in that time, he took me to my first convention, which was in the Minneapolis area. It was a world horror, and he and Neil Gaiman, I think, were guests of honor, and they had just co-written a walking tour of the Shambles. Yes, I remember. So that was my first convention, and then I went to some more in the Twilight Tales group, and then later, like as the kind of years go by, and I would go with groups of friends to conventions. We would pile in a car. We would all sleep in one hotel room on the floor, 3 to a bed, and then in my mid-20s, as Rosemary started ailing, he would ask me. He'd say, like, I'll pay for your convention or hotel if you'll drive with us, help spot me for driving, and then and help take Rosemary to places that he couldn't go easily. So that's what I did in my late 20s, and I just, until I moved away from the Chicagoland area, and after that we were mostly correspondents, or we'd see each other at conventions, and then when I visited my dad, I would also visit Gene. But he called me his honorary granddaughter, and I've just always loved him. And he wrote the intro for Bone Swans, and he loved the Big Baja too, which is like how I can tell. I think it was the most like his weirdness, you know, and that makes sense that you would love the weirdness of the Twice Drowned Saint, where I was like, I don't know, I'll do this thing that makes total sense to me, and I still can't. It's hard to put myself in the mindset of the mind that I was in when I made it, because I was just trying something, you know, and like looking back, and that is so weird. Some of my weirdest stuff. I had a weird story come out called Though She Be But Little. Though She Be But Little. And it was a story in that kind of like super weird Claire mode, but I'd come upon a half-finished draft of it that I had no memory of writing, and I was like, oh, and I finished it with no idea how I originally wanted to finish it or who these people were, but it was so bizarre. It was like writing an exquisite corpse with myself, and that was, you know, it's a very fun opportunity to stretch. And I think more lately, with the longer stuff, well, like Saint Death's Daughter had 12 years of revisions and polish and trying to make it, because I wrote everything else while I was writing that as a piece. I wrote all the Bone Swan stories, the Darkbreaker stuff, like a bunch of stuff in that time period. But so Saint Death's Daughter, it makes the most sense, but it has some weird, like, not exactly linear, or it does time jumps and things like that, but it's still on a narrative level is not as bizarre as with the Twice Drowned Saint, based on a dream, so it was already had a core weirdness. And Twice Drowned Saint also, I had to do a lot of research into early cinema, Silver Age, and then the third thing was that I wanted every chapter to be a different camera angle. So every chapter is a specific camera angle, and then I tried to tell it as if the prose were that camera angle. So I was, and it was very structured to have only those 14 or 15 chapters because of the angels. So it was an experimental structure in the longest form that I've done that kind of like highly stylized thing with. So it was a big puzzle piece, and I enjoyed writing it.
That's really cool. So Wolfe obviously read Bone Swans. Did he get a chance to look at your other stuff?
Let's see. I feel like I would always send him things. I know Jack of the Hills, which came out in my mid-20s, which was the Stone Shoes and Oubliette's Egg. Stone Shoes was definitely my first pro short story, and he definitely read it, and he really liked it and told me basically to send it to Subterranean. So I know he read that. I'm trying to think of, like, I think he read some short stories in the middle there, but I'm not sure. I was so constantly working on my novel, and he was, I think, surprised that it took me that long, you know. So, and all the little stuff, because he wrote a novel in a year, basically. He would write it 1 year, and he'd set it aside for a few months, start another one, do a draft of that, revise the other novel, and then give it to his agent. So he was very mechanical, and I was still figuring out. I already spent so much time on that novel that I didn't want to give up on it, even though at several points it would have made sense to trunk it, you know. But I still like the idea too much to do that.
Good. I know we have a lot of people who listen who like to follow it, because we will, since we get so in the weeds sometimes of things, we start talking about craft and stuff like that. Did he give you any specific advice that you can remember?
Oh, yeah. So we exchanged letters for years.
That's awesome.
And I would keep all his letters in the same photo album as I kept all my rejection slips when they were paper.
Gotcha.
So one of the first things he said in that 3-page letter for the novel that I'd sent him, or the chapters, was, "This was great." He didn't pull punches, but for whatever reason, things that would make me highly sensitive from almost anyone else, I was just like, this is the greatest advice ever from him.
No, that's good.
Because it was so benevolent, right? And he said, your characters are great, your dialogue is great, but you interrupt your dialogue with lumps of prose like uncooked dumplings. And so, like, it was the first time I thought about, like, what I ended up in game design we call order of operations.
Okay.
You know, like, there's a time for dialogue, and then if you're going to do a piece of world building, it's not usually in the middle of a conversation, which I never really thought about before.
Yeah.
So that was one thing.
Yeah.
The big piece of advice was just like, you know, when submitting, you know, like, all right, you got a rejection, so do a new draft, send it out again. Like that was, and when I got really upset, which I sometimes did, it was like, Gene, I just cried and cried when I got a rejection. He said, good on you. That means you still care. You know, like, just... I remember I wrote a very weird piece. It was a poem, and he loved poetry. His favorite was Rudyard Kipling, but he could quote poetry. He could quote folk songs, songs of all kinds. He loved the song. Pale was the wounded knight. The Witch of the Westmorelands was one of them, and he would tear up when he quoted that. But he loved Rudyard Kipling. But so he loved that I wrote poetry. He always said that novels were easy, short stories were much harder, and poetry was the hardest of all. So he's so very, very encouraging with my poetry. And he loved form poetry and rhyme poetry, which especially in the aughts, it was very difficult to place my poems, which not only often rhymed and were rhythmic, though not necessarily form poems. I just sort of did it as I pleased. But were long form. Like, I wrote narrative story poems, like the Highwayman length, you know, just several pages, tell the whole story in rhyme. So I wrote one called In the Garden of Koshki the Deathless, or something like that, based on all of the Ivans. I was reading a lot of, like, Russian folklore.
Oh, that's fun.
And so it was all of the Ivans, Koshki's Garden, the Firebird, like all of that. And I did it, and it was rhymey, but it was, you know, columns of poetry. But he's like, why don't you take out all the line breaks, make it prose? And I was like, should I take out all the rhymes? He said, absolutely not. Keep all the rhymes in. And I was like, I was super surprised. I wasn't sure I agreed on that, but he seemed to like that because it was narrative. You could read it as prose, but because it was poetry, it was the rhymes and the language were enlivened it, or it made it stand out, which I wanted to be more normal, and I think he was pushing my weirdness in a really cool way, and was like that. He was always like that with me.
That's fun.
He also gave you cool historical advice, like he told you about, taking off bowstrings and
Oh my gosh, he's like, because he knew a lot of, and then from him, I sort of learned that you do research, even fantasy, which I was like, I would just make things up. I would, based on what I saw in an 80s fantasy film, it was like, well, now write it as prose. And he called me out on something in that early high school novel. He's like, if it was raining, they wouldn't have their bows out. Their bowstrings were catgut or something, and if they got wet, they wouldn't work anymore. So they would unstring their bows. And I would it would never occur to me to ask the question. I didn't know how bows worked. In a movie, they just shot bows all the time, and he was angry that they would say fire, fire, and fire their bows because they would say shoot. Draw, shoot. So he knew all these little things that started to make me curious about how to ask those questions. Or like I was telling you a little earlier, he came in the bookstore I was working at one day looking for what ancient Phoenicians ate for breakfast. It brought a whole bunch of books home. When I asked him later what ancient Phoenicians ate for breakfast, have you ever found out? He's like, yes, I found out. They didn't eat breakfast. and so like he would do a lot of research just to find out a negative, which I thought was just, it really like, I'm not a natural researcher or like somebody who I feel highly intelligent, but sort of dreamy. And it sort of taught me a little bit about the usefulness of curiosity and how fun research could be, especially when you're doing something close to our world or our history, which often fantasy is. I found that out mostly when I was writing Darkbreaker, since it's like Gilded Age equivalent era. And some of the most fun stuff, and sometimes I get lost in it, I wanted to know what were typewriters named. They had brand names, and mostly they were named things like Royal or Monarch or Crown. They would have all these like famous, they'd all be royalty names. So when I was naming this particular typewriter that was owned by a very wealthy family, I would call it Diadem, because it felt like in that time period something like what a typewriter would be called.
That's cool.
Yeah, and I think that comes directly from Gene.
Yeah. That's very cool. That's very cool. Well, I want to switch a little bit because we're recording this at Gen Con. Part of the main reason I think you guys are here at Gen Con rather than a writer con or reader con is that you two just put out a game.
Yes.
And is this a forced segue? I don't know. I mean, it's not exactly like science fantasy.
I would say science
It is
fantasy.
science
100%
fantasy.
science
Okay, it's whether or not the fantasy, but yeah, you're right. Actually, it is. New Sun's considered science fantasy. We've got a science fantasy thing, and this is something I did go buy the game. I'll say before, but it's sold out here, which is good. Would y'all mind saying a little bit about what this is? Because this is the kind of thing that, again, if you're into the weird and you like stuff that can go in all kinds of strange directions that we have, this is something cool.
And so I want to introduce my husband. This is Carlos Hernandez.
He's been here forever. We're trading back and forth.
Carlos is an English professor at CUNY in New York, and he is an award-winning writer of middle grade children's literature as well as science fiction for grown-ups. He wrote The Assimilated Cuban's Guide to Quantum Santeria and Sal and Gabby Break the Universe and Sal and Gabby Fix the Universe for the Rick Riordan Presents series. And he's a game designer as well as a professor and writer. So Carlos wanted me to like games.
Specifically Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah.
Because, I'm a kid of the 80s, I've been playing it all my life, and Claire is just a natural for playing D&D. Award-winning writer, plus somebody who is a trained actor, just like it seems like the perfect person to play D&D. But Claire was not convinced.
Because I spent so much time writing fabulous, weird fantasy worlds and then reading other people's prose aloud as an actor, as an audiobook narrator, like something like D&D just sounded like a lot of work during my playtime.
Yeah.
And I couldn't quite, some things were causing me anxiety that I've now pinpointed after lots of thought, which was this idea of how long does this game last? Wait, it's indefinite? You're going to stay up all night playing with your Mountain Dew and your Captain Crunch, and there's no end? And wait, what are the rules? And I was in one game where they were like, oh, you'll just figure it out, and they threw me into a game, which is actually, I think a lot of people have learned D&D like that and maybe found their love in it. It actually is not the way I learned. It spiked a bunch of anxiety and like this feeling of I don't know what I'm doing, I'm not good at it, and I don't want to play anymore.
Yeah.
So I had a kind of a wall up. So Carlos wanted to bring that wall down.
Yeah.
And so he said, why don't we design a TTRPG, a tabletop role-playing game that you would like? What would be some of those things? Tell them the first mechanic that you were testing before we even decided to collaborate.
Well, the mechanic that I was testing was sort of like just using cards as prompts for storytelling.
Yeah.
So I took famous art from all over the world that was out of copyright, so that even in playtest I didn't feel bad using about it.
Yeah.
And I would just write some weird sayings on it. So there would be like a famous bucolic forest scene, and below it I would write something like "trees eat meat," to create a weird contrast that you could try to storytell from. And I actually went to a museum with Fran Wild and Meg Frank, who are people in the science fiction community right now, and I tested a little character creation with them using these cards, and it was so surprisingly effective for both of those. Like,
cool.
There is a there, so that's where we started. But then the idea was that how can we make the experience for onboarding into role-playing absolutely as easy as possible? So really, a die roll, even if you're rolling a d20, especially back then. Now we have subtler die rolls, but back then a die roll was a binary anyway. So it's a yes or no answer that you get from your die.
Yeah.
So I was like, okay, well, we don't actually need to have complicated dice, and you don't need to roll 4d8 plus 2 or whatever for this. Just, I tell you what, we'll draw a card and there'll be a symbol on it, and if you have that symbol matching on your character sheet, you succeed. Otherwise, you don't.
Yeah.
And so the game ends up being about as easy as Candyland, literally matching colors and suits in terms of determining success or failure.
Yeah.
But the richness comes
Well,
from
and I
the
was-
images and sayings on it.
Yeah, because what I was going to say is that sounds like a simple game, but once you get the narrative that's going on with it and all the possibilities, that's where it becomes something else altogether.
We
which is
wanted
really
a
cool.
fantasy game that wasn't British or German coded
Yeah.
as far as its culture and its language. So we were talking about, well, why not the Spanish Inquisition could be pretty rich. And in the beginning, it was just sort of a land like Spain. It was always a Spada during this turmoil and dark, turbulent time. Because I think I was sort of like into the darkness, and you were into something that was Spanish coded. And we bought a bunch of books on the Inquisition.
Yeah.
But quickly during playtests, we realized it's a difficult thing for anybody to want to play who is not already in a very dark mood. And then some of our Jewish friends would play, and they knew that the Spanish Inquisition was a time of a huge genocide and massacre, and a lot of Jewish people were killed as part of it. And it was almost like it was a complete turnoff, like
Yeah.
from the beginning before we even played. So Carlos had this great idea, which at first I was resistant to, and now, I mean, he's just a genius, and he was right all the time. But he's like, what if it's the Spanish Inquisition interrupted by aliens? He was so excited about this, and I was like, it just sounds silly. It's like, that's just silly. I don't know if I would have fun playing a silly game. Oh my gosh, though. It's so fun and wild because it takes away, like, a different decision was made. So it creates alternate history paths.
Yeah.
And it creates lots of room for cosmic interference, misunderstandings, cultural misunderstandings.
Yeah.
Dramatic irony. too.
Dramatic irony.
Yeah, yeah.
And so, at the end of our game right now, the game ends with you not even playing the characters you started with, but playing the aliens who gave you your powers.
Right.
And we call it the alien epilogue. So your alien caseworker figures out, whether or not you've actually succeeded in becoming a better person or not.
At Gen Con, Origins, PAX, we've run Negocios Infernales a lot, and the people who are drawn to play it are usually the experienced role players.
Yeah.
But some of our favorites are when family groups come. We met this family called the Scanlons, and they came and conquered our hearts. And then now we're all like brothers and sisters together. And then there was another wonderful family a few years ago, and they had a couple teenagers, and we were like, this is a little dark, and the parents were like, they can handle it.
Yeah.
They
And boy,
were
could they.
amazing.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, they just went all in, and it's
Like,
really only
even-
been a pleasure.
Yeah, like it was like an 11-year-old boy was the youngest, and they were all just like little genius storytellers.
That's
right?
cool.
So like it was a great family experience.
Last night, two new friends from New York that we met through musical theater. She was a director, and then her husband, Ian. They showed up to play, and then one person that we met at PAX last year, Jordan, who is also a game designer and a gamer, he showed up to play, and then one person we didn't know who was an incredible gamer showed up to play. So they were all strangers to each other, but we were familiar with some of them, and they had the most incredible game. And we were just watching, like, how does it even work? We made it to work, we tested it, and yet it's miraculous every time these incredibly complex narratives come out in 4.5 hours
Yeah.
or less.
Yeah. But that's really the beauty of it, is in the end, it's a storytelling game, is what it
100%.
is. Like, I think I even mentioned you, it feels very much like there are those things now where it's the like I think you mentioned the story, the creativity cards that people have, where it's like, if you're stuck, flip a card and do something like this. That's when I first read the description, that's what it seemed like. And then once I saw it did something else in a different way, but in an amazing way, because you've got a structure there. It's not just, random sort of aphorisms to help you go somewhere else.
No.
It really is.
Right. We include things like dream interpretation as a mechanic,
Yeah.
and that just leads to all sorts of wildness that people wouldn't expect. Because a lot of
Yeah.
times, like if you use like these different creativity types that are there,
Yeah.
they're still pretty standard prompts, So one of the things that we wanted to do was sort of like go next level with the kinds of ways that we prompted people to tell their stories.
Yeah.
Lean into the weirdness, and people are so beautifully weird. Once they sort of, last night, one of the players was like, I don't know, like, how left field can I go? And we were like, see the box? It says, get to the fun part, the mayhem, So it is really, our weirdness is encouraged, and the great word we learned in the last few years that seemed to be very specific to this was apophenia, which is the human's tendency to recognize patterns even when there are none. And so because the cards, the suits, the everything from the character creation to the relationship to the world building is all collaborative and GM-less, and everybody has it together. Everybody's establishing patterns that they may not be conscious of, but a lot of people who are really good gamers are conscious of them. That they build and build until when it gets to the role play, it's all there for them. That they made the matrix is there and they're in it. They've made their own matrix and now they play in it, and they are constantly making connections from things they just invented, and it's beautiful.
Yeah, and if they're not experienced improv people, like if they don't have an improv background, what they get is the ascendant joy of the callback. You know, like our game like emphasizes callback as a pleasurable mechanic.
That's awesome. And I'll say this too: the Wolf people, Apophenia is great for what sort of Wolf obsessives do, which is they're looking for everything that might be hidden, and even if it's something he never intended, somebody's got a theory for it.
You know, as an academic, I would say, literary scholars, I think that's kind of our job.
But this game is made to do that and to help you with that, and so it's just for those of you who really like the that side of Wolf, this game's probably made for you. So,
if you've played Mysterium or Dixit, that those beautiful, dreamy, and surreal cards, and then imagine like weird, poetic, oracular sayings affixed to them, like something somebody would say in a dream that makes total sense in the dream, but not so much when you wake up.
Yeah.
That's the main mechanic.
Yeah, and there's also, you should say, there's a book in the game that has some of y'all's examples of stories that you've told, and you also have a book I'm holding right now, Infernal Bargains, which is what y'all have taken from playing it.
Yeah.
Very close, actually.
Very close.
So we run Infernal Salons that use the core deck of 70 cards that we have in there, that oracular deck, in order to just have fun with 40 or 50 of the random people that might show up to a salon. And what we do is we give out cards to the audience, and we have them write for 20 minutes, and then we share. And what's come out of that is that people will share stories, and things will unlock that maybe had been locked before. We've had many, many friends of ours who are, professional writers, especially like during COVID, who would say things like, "Oh, I was having so much trouble writing," and then all of a sudden, these 3 cards unlock something, and I was able to write. And we've had many of our friends who've published things, based on the things that they've written. And then also just like this host of people that really just have a beautiful time inside the salon. Well, every time we're in the salon, we also get involved. We practice what we preach. We write with cards, and this is a collection of mostly stories and poems that we have published based on cards that we've drawn.
Cool.
In Infernal Salon. So the cards in-game are used as the game mechanic, but out of the game, we yank the deck, and then we use it just for creative prompts. And they're a bit macabre, so we say like PG-13 and up, or we remove some of the cards if we see there are children in the audience, but it's fairly grotesque, but the grotesque can really unlock some, almost like the kind of the hilarious side. When it gets dark, people sometimes bounce to the like, I guess, the hilarity and lightness and almost giddiness.
And also leads to a lot of like satire and that kind of like ironic humor as well. But so a lot of people will go grimdark, but other people will go much more sort of like light fantasy and only like sort of like Terry Pratchett levels of dark, and instead lean into the humor of it.
Gotcha.
But it's one of my favorite things, and I know it's one of Claire's too.
During COVID, our friends started something called Mermaids Monthly magazine, a very limited 2-year run where Julia Rios had been editor at Strange Horizons, and they said that
Hugo Award-winning Julia Rios.
Award-winning Julia Rios, amazing editor, amazing person, and a great writer. And they said that they would get so many mermaid submissions to Strange Horizons, and they could only maybe publish one a year, because otherwise, if you do more than that, you'd be known as that mermaid magazine. So during COVID, as a project to, I don't know, lighten their spirits, Julia and Meg Frank, who was one of the initial playtesters for Negocios Infernales, they were like, let's be that mermaid magazine for a little while. So they published all mermaids all the time, and they approached us and asked us to write a mermaid story. So we wrote a story set in Espada, which is the world of the game. because we were very familiar. We'd done all the world building cards. Anytime we wanted, we could just pull more cards and make up new stuff about the world. So we were already invoiced, where we didn't have to sit there and decide on the world. We'd made it, and we'd lived in it for 3 years as we play tested. It was our first foray into fiction in this IP, I guess. And we had this idea. I think it was your idea. What if mermaids were, instead of what you think they are, colossi? What if they were bigger than blue whales? And the reason why nobody sees them is because they're not looking that big.
Yeah, they're not ready for it. So that one is called A Minnow or Perhaps a Colossal Squid, and it was placed in a Year's Best anthology by Paula Duran, I think.
Yeah.
So.
It was originally, so Mermaids Monthly, then it was reprinted. But it was really fun to co-write with him. We've only done maybe 3 or 4 stories where we've co-written, but it's how our friendship began.
Yeah.
Long before our relationship. By long, I mean like 4 months. And so he took kind of the scholastic, academic, science-obsessed writer who's the explorer who's spent all of her money and all of the queen's money on pursuing these legendary mermaids of Espada, and is now in debtor's prison, and for refusing to actually use her knowledge for the good of Espada. She's like, I'm not gonna tell you where these mermaids are so you can go after them and exploit them,
hunt them, etc.
Yeah, like, first of all, you have no idea what you're going after, and second of all, I'm better than that. So this academic in debtor's prison is Carlos's point of view, and then I'm writing the point of view of a younger girl, like late teens, early 20s, who's got a very low level job in the debtor's prison. And the weird thing about the debtor's prison is, in this world, when you're a debtor, you get turned into a fish. And when you can pay your debt, you can be turned back into a human. So the debtor's prison is like an aquarium that she keeps. And and this scientist is about to be sentenced to her fish form. And usually you can express a preference.
Yeah.
And so she was like, maybe I'll just be a minnow and be eaten as soon as possible. Yeah. And so this young person who is realizing maybe for the first time how unfair this system is and how bad the penal system and imprisonment and transformation and how useless it is ultimately, and how the monarchy is maybe corrupt. Why should people go hunting mermaids? And she had kind of hero worshipped the scientist from afar, and is just appalled that she's in prison. So like kind of like a coming of age on her end, and the next step for her. Do you want to tell what the academic ended up being?
I think we should save that, but let's just say that you could either choose to be in an aquarium in the hopes of being returned, or you could be released into the sea. And she chooses the deadliness of just being released into the ocean. And her fate awaits you in that story. So give it a read.
Oh yeah,
it's available for free online. Just if you Google Mermaids Monthly. And,
awesome. I'll find a link. It'll be in the show notes.
Yeah. Oh, awesome! Yeah, or you can get a copy of Infernal Bargains from Outlander Entertainment.
If you like supporting authors,
Yes, absolutely. Speaking of, can we talk about your latest other written project? And I'm curious about I have a copy of the book and the name, The Cuban.
Yeah.
I bought it to read it since you're actually here, and I wasn't necessarily thinking we would talk necessarily. I haven't read it yet.
You will love it.
It sounds really cool. Like, it sounds like the kind of thing. And I am always, just because of my background, anytime I find an academic who's also written fiction, that fascinates me. Like, how do you translate between those worlds? But I also want to know about St. Death's Herald is the newest.
Herald came out in April.
Yeah. Okay.
Can I tell you a secret about Assimilated Cubans Guide to Quantum Santeria?
Yeah.
It's so great. First of all, it's a collection of short stories, all science fiction, maybe some fantasy.
Some fantasy, some magical realism,
some
one mystery.
Yeah. Super, super amazing novums, very literary, gorgeous. But there's 3 where he has this recurring character he always loved. She's I'm trying to remember the name of that kind of journalist.
Like a journalist of cryptozoological and the fantastical.
And the paranormal.
Gotcha. And the paranormal.
Gotcha. So her name is Gabrielle Real. And so when I first started reading Carlos's stories, I encountered her in several of his stories. He said, oh, she's aspirational. I want to be like this person, this character, when I grow up. And later when Disney found him, first Rick Riordan read his short story collection, gave it an incredible review on Goodreads, gave it to his editor at Disney, who contacted Carlos and
nice.
said, hey, write
Yeah,
for us.
nice.
And when Carlos is, serious science fiction literary writer. And he's like, I've never thought about writing for kids. Do I have anything to say? And we started brainstorming, and he chose to take two characters who were grown-up characters in Assimilated Humans Guide, the main character from the title story, and Gabrielle Real, who is a recurring character, and make them children.
Oh, and that's the two.
Yeah.
Sal and Gabby
Okay.
break the universe.
Gotcha.
So hopefully the kids who have now grown up with these stories, and for some people we're reading them in the COVID years, will, when they grow up, realize when they find Assimilated Humans Guide to Quantum Centaurea, will be so pleasurably surprised.
That's awesome. That's very cool.
Yeah.
That's very cool.
Yes, but yeah, and then Harold came out in April of this year.
Very cool. And it's a sequel. I mean,
Yeah.
sequel
Oh,
to
definitely a sequel.
to
Yeah.
Saint Death's Daughter, which is I should let you describe it. I won't describe it. So,
Saint
but-
Death's Daughter came out of an idea I had when I was, my best friend told me, she was like, you know what, you're an author, you need to know how to shoot guns. She's from Arizona, so am I. So she takes me to the desert to shoot guns at tires. And either my headset wasn't working, or I have very sensitive hearing, or both. But after the first shot, I couldn't shoot again because it was too loud. It scared me, and I didn't want to hear that noise again. I do have sensitive ears. I now wear loops. I'm more aware of it now than I was then. But my hands were shaking, my palms were sweating, and I was like, dang. If I'd be the greatest assassin if I would just need a silencer, I would be so great I would be such a cold stone killer. And then I was thinking, wouldn't it be funny if a girl grows up in a family of assassins and she just has this terrible allergy to violence?
Yeah, literally.
Literally.
Yeah, literally.
And then that thought grew. It was like, what if the allergy to violence, if that grows stronger and stronger, and it's an indication that if it's strong enough, you can become a necromancer. It's so strong. It's so anathema that you can raise the dead. And that was what really interested me, because I thought to have a protagonist who is incapable of solving problems through violence in a fantasy world is not usual. I haven't seen a lot of it, and I wanted to, and I thought that will be interesting. I'd follow her somewhere. So even though it was a very long process, the first book took 12 years to write 12 times correctly, and took a long time to get an agent and then find a home. But it did, and I love her, and I feel like the people who love her needed her, and I'm glad for that. So the second book.
And you have to say her name too.
Oh, her full name is Miscellaneous Immiscible Stones. And they call her Lainey for short, Lainey Stones. But I like that when she talks to herself, she calls herself Miscellaneous. I like that the Stoneses all kind of name their family pretty dire things, like Amanita muscaria after the death cap mushroom, or unnatural.
Who goes by Nita. Right?
Yeah, Nita. Sacred Datura. I love Sacred Datura. I remember my mom saying once, she's like, oh, that's the Sacred Datura plant. It's poisonous. And so I just was like, there's a plant called Sacred Datura. I think I've recently come to realize it's just the Datura plant, except that I think some groups find it sacred, and I think my mother just gave it that as a name, I think. But I loved Sacred Datura as a full name for stones.
But also, there are just hilarious names, too, like Opsha Stone.
Yes.
But eventually I started naming stones as every time I found a word I loved that was obsolete and that I didn't want to forget, I would just name a stone that.
Yeah.
So Opsha was such a great name it was a name for somebody who mooches off of you. Basically, like the person who comes to your party and then stays for 3 weeks and eats your food and doesn't pay rent and won't leave your couch, kind of thing.
Right.
Opsha
Like
stones.
Anderson visiting Dickens, right?
That's only from Dickens' perspective. I wonder what Hans Christian Andersen thought. Like, what is going on? Why is he so mean to me?
I just read, though, that Hans Christian Andersen was like asking Dickens to have his eldest son like shave him every morning, and he said that's something that happens, in his home country. And no, it doesn't. He's just a weird guy.
All right, you're right. He was a bit weird.
Yeah.
Poor thing. He breaks my heart. But yeah, maybe Dickens was just fed up, and that makes sense.
Yeah. But then Saint Death's Herald is the sequel.
It's the sequel, but I mean, it's same world, same characters.
Yeah.
But the first book, as a subgenre, I would call it a Bildungsroman. It's a coming of age. She's 15 when it starts. She's 22 at the end. So there's a big time jump, and time, place, and action is sort of all in the same country, but she goes from being kind of isolated in a countryside manner to living in the middle of a city in a tomb. And that's sort of, and it's family oriented, and it is slow build and lots of different movements, like pieces like a symphony, I would say. And then the second book was perforce almost 100,000 words shorter. I was told it had to be. So it probably wouldn't have been if I was told differently. And so there was a great deal I had to cut from the first few drafts. But also the nature of it is more like, if it was a genre, it'd be like that genre of Sherlock Holmes and Moriarty, or Luther and the serial killer. It's sort of like private investigator with a special genius against a very conniving serial killer. Only the serial killer is a ghost of a necromancer, and the investigator pursuer, the only one who can stop him is a necromancer who's alive. So like it's a car chase novel. It is pursuit. It is failure. It is like pursuit again, and I would say it's like a 3 combat novel. Combat was not something I really specialize in, so Carlos was very helpful. He would lay out D&D maps, grid maps, and just we'd scatter minis, and we wouldn't do D&D rules or games, but I don't have a very good aerial imagination. Like I don't have an overhead view or a way of, I don't visualize easily cinematically. So it'd be like, well, okay, so who's moving now? What are the movements, the beats of the combat? So we'd kind of play it out like kids with dolls, and I'd write down like the bullet points, and then I'd write a very basic scene that was basically like prose form choreography, and then Carlos would read it, and then he would give me beautiful feedback, like, all right, but the important thing in a fight scene is actually how everybody reacts to the things that are happening, and and also whose point of view is this particular piece of combat from. So I learned so much writing it, and there's these big battle scenes for poor lady who is deathly allergic to that sort of thing. And so, and she's constantly having to improvise because no problem that she has to solve is like the last problem she has to solve. So she's growing in power and stretching herself in ways she's never had to before, and in ways that are deeply anathema to her. Yeah. And but so it's very laser focused, and it's very like from the beginning to the end is sort of like a breathless. I mean, it's driven, and I got to explore new parts of the country and the world. It's not where she comes from. It's in a different part of the world, and then a whole different part of the world from that as the chase moves on. So many cool new kinds of magic, because different parts of the land worship different gods, and magic comes from the gods, so what the focus on the gods will be how the magic changes. So there's a lot of, I don't know, there was so much that was pleasurable in writing it, and I learned so much. And the third book, which I've just contracted for. Oh, nice. Which is good because I get to finish the triptych, right? Yeah. It's 10 years in the future. It's a court intrigue murder mystery. It's a totally different subgenre. That's so it will be all in like one palace. It will be solving a mystery, unlocking clues, masquerades, orgies, that kind of thing. It'll be super pleasurable to write, but it will be super different from book 2, which is super different from book 1. And so different readers will like different things about different books, and will like some more or less than others, I think. Right.
And if you get a 4th book, it's going to be just like the Naked Gun series.
It's exciting to plan it, though.
It's on its head. Well, let's see. We've got about an hour or so in there. So, and that y'all have been very generous with your time. So, anything else you would like to talk about?
What are you working on, Carlos?
Oh yeah. We mentioned your old stuff, and so you are working now. Is there another one of the YA books? The 2 kids coming out?
Yeah, so there is a longer short story that's also available. So I wrote it as a novel and sequel. That was always the plan. That's what I contracted for. Yeah. And then later I was also able to write a longer short story that's called Calamity Juice, that ties off a bow that I'd always wanted to, that I'd left a seed in the first story that never quite satisfyingly got finished. So it was very nice to do that. But now I'm writing a completely different middle grade book right now. And it's funny, a lot of people don't really know middle grade who aren't really steeped in genres. So I told a friend, oh yeah, I'm working on a middle grade book. And he was like, oh really? Shouldn't you try harder? Shouldn't it be a higher grade? It's funny what you run into. I've also learned to say grown-up writing as opposed to adult writing because you get that supercilious eyebrows like, oh really?
Yeah.
Adult?
You read adult books.
That's right.
Right.
But this is a middle grade book, and the basic premise is that all the rats of New York are the narrator. So it's the first person plural.
Oh, nice.
So
Wow. Okay.
all the rats of New York are telling the story of how they hired a family of exterminators in order to help them exterminate something they need exterminating, namely a dragon that has taken up residence in Lower Manhattan.
Cool.
So,
Cool.
And then out this fall is Scaring and Daring, right?
oh yeah, and yeah. So
This is great.
I have a couple of short stories that have recently come out, both in the middle grade arena, and one of them is coming out of Scaring and Daring. This is from the Horror Writers Association, and the
I like that the horror writers have a middle grade.
Yeah,
but
exactly.
it makes sense nowadays.
And the challenge was to write a middle grade horror that was based on some classical literature. So I
Okay.
chose Don Quixote.
Okay.
And so basically what I did is I imagined that Rocinante, the horse of Don Quixote, rather than just being desperately, skinny nag that looked like it was on death's door, just literally make it undead. So this is the story of how young Don Quixote gets his ghost horse, So
That's cool.
Yeah.
Okay.
Boy of La Mancha rides a ghost horse is the name
is
of
the title.
Okay,
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, guys, thank you for your time. Thank you for sitting on the ground with me for an hour here.
It's our
in
pleasure.
Gen Con. But I will have links to everything we talked about.
Awesome. Thank you
I'll
so
put that
much.
up there. I'll get this out, and I'll record some other ending because again, I'm not good at doing live. Anything else you want to add?
Let me
at
just
all?
see. Let me see if there's anything awesome coming out. We could talk about the Twitch thing. We could talk about. Sorry, let me just think about it for
Yeah.
a second.
Oh, Twitch is the game on Twitch. Do you?
Well, we definitely have run the game on Twitch before, and Claire has sort of like we've slow rolled out something we're calling Fiction Impossible, where we are trying to, talk to people about their pros and things like that. So we're hoping to have Matt Kressel, who just put out recently.
Space Trucker Jess.
Yeah,
Yep.
so we want to have him on in the near future. And
We
just
had Mary Soonley, who's the Grandmaster of Poetry, about her epic poetry novel, which is so good, called Sign of the Dragon.
Yes.
So we have them talk about books they're loving, games they're loving, and then we have them read from their book and then talk about their book.
Yeah.
So
so people should just follow CSE Cooney on Twitch.
Yeah, good. And I was going to say, too, you are connected to the world of speculative poetry
love it.
quite a bit. And I know we've had some people reach out to us just because of, that's on the weirder angle of things. So if you're looking to get in a little bit to see what kind of stuff is out there, your blog is another way to just start finding people. So that's... I'll just throw that out there.
I love
Yeah.
to boost the cool, weird people of this world.
Yes, indeed. So, well, guys, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Once a comic playwright named Aristophanes who wrote about a woman who united ancient Greece, stopped the war with Sparta. Lysistrata was her name. Teasing was her tactic, provocation was her game. Strut, Lysistrata. Make the boys gasp like a fish out of water. Show them all you're more than just a mere inamorata. Strut, Lysistrata. Gathered all her girls together, dressed in her best clothes. Even sent for women, war decree to be her foes. Told them too much combat lays a grievous waste to man. Have to stop this killing, girls, I think I got a plan. Strut, Lysistrata. Refused to make his coffee or his favorite frittata. Renounce this war, be denounced persona non grata. Strut, Lysistrata.
Of course, everything goes a little weird right when you want to.
Oh, that's just tech stuff. Every time we run a Twitch cast, we have everything all set, and then something just inevitably goes wrong.
Right.
And it's sort of
Right.
like, pause for 30 minutes while we try to fix this. And actually,
Yeah.
I say we, but Carlos is